Hello, good evening, good morning, good afternoon, all of you podcast listeners. Thanks again for tuning into the podcast. Great to have you here and great to be bringing you another recipe podcast this week. This week is all about how to measure effective outcomes for your business and tell your community story, right? So today, what I'm actually going to be talking you through is a presentation I gave at a Oreo conference a couple of years ago that is about how to actually help people understand what reports mean and how to help them see the story behind reports. I think people often take way too much time counting numbers in reports, counting views, counting comments, counting likes, and of course, as I've said so many times over the history of this podcast, they are all not specifically business outcomes, right? So 100 comments is not a specific business outcome. It doesn't have a business measure, and it doesn't necessarily have some business value add to it. What you want to get to from the reporting standpoint is how you really create business outcomes, which means that when you look at your reports, when you do your reports, you need to look at them in a way where you are looking in an outcome-oriented way. You're not looking in a way for just loads of vanity metrics and the highest number, whatever it is, just lots of counting and lots of thumbs up. You are looking past those numbers to be able to get the insights from the data, insights that are going to help you make effective decisions for your business and go on to either inform or be outcomes for themselves that are going to really move your business forward, that you can substantiate, that are valuable, that are going to help you and your business, right? So today I'm going to talk you through what is essentially a workshop of how I help people start seeing those differences and start seeing the insights behind the data. And hopefully, if you're still one of those people that's kind of counting data and isn't quite sure what that data is telling you, hopefully I can give you some insights on this as well. Now, the measures that I'm talking about here, they're all about community, right? So this specific podcast is about reporting on communities. So the kind of measures that I talk about are ones that are generally data that's available for any community platform you are on. The terms I use might be slightly different for yours, but I'll describe each one as we go, and you should be able to find an equivalent in whatever platform you're using. They're pretty common ways to measure engagement within community platforms on ESNs, so don't take them as gospel and say, oh, I don't have this for this. Go out and look at your own reports on whatever platform you're using, and there should be an equivalent that will match the same things that I'm talking about at the moment, right? So the first thing I'm going to talk about is imagine this. Imagine the results that you would get if you spent all the time that you were creating your reports on engaging your community instead, right? We all know how much time reporting can take up. And the purpose of a report is to provide you with something actionable. But we end up spending so much time creating reports after reports after reports. They pile on and on and on. And how much of that really gets taken forward? How much of that helps us make change in our business? What if we could get that time back and really, engage in our community, deliver against solid outcomes with solid tasks? What if we got that back? It really is significant. The amount of time people spend reporting really is significant. And part of doing reports well is being able to see the insights, but also knowing what is or isn't relevant and knowing what to focus on and knowing what to cut out of your workflow and where to spend your time. Because if you're spending all your time counting up a whole load of numbers to get you the highest number possible, you've got less time to actually be looking at that data and creating the insights. Oftentimes we get the data in, then we fire it off, it's done, job done, big tick. Instead of really taking the time to think about what is this data telling us? What does it mean? What are the insights that this data is offering us? So I'm going to just ask you, imagine if you had that time back. I'm sure it would be pretty significant for you. So, we're going to talk about how you get that time back. But before I get into it, as usual, if you haven't done it already, subscribe to this podcast. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. You'll get all the latest podcasts straight into your feed as and when. There's also coming up to almost 100 episodes now in the feed. I think I'm at sort of 89 or so at this point, which is really exciting. So I will be celebrating my 100th episode in the not too distant future. So make sure you hit subscribe and you get all of the previous episodes. There is so much in all of these podcasts that I've been putting together for the last few years. There is so much there. There are all the answers to how to make collaboration and community successful in the previous episodes of this podcast. So make sure you hit that subscribe button. And if you have been with me for that time and you're getting value out of the podcast and you haven't rated it yet, then go ahead and please leave me a rating. I know a bunch of you haven't rated it yet. I know that. So please take a moment to go and leave me a rating. Hit me some stars. Leave me a comment. It really, really helps me get the word out there and to reach more people. And ultimately, that's my goal, is to reach as many people as possible. So please take a moment to leave a review. It really does go a long way. Okay, jumping back into it then. So what are the purpose of reports? Why do we create reports? Well, the purpose of a report, a good report, is one that's going to teach you something about your audience. It's not just going to say, we got X number of comments this month. It's going to teach you something about your audience, something new. And it's going to provide you insights into their behaviors. It's going to help you understand why they are doing the things that they are doing and how you can take those insights, go forward with them, and use them to be even more successful in the future. So really, a good report should be steering those strategies for the future. And it should be demonstrating to you where to focus and where not to. Really providing those insights and saying, right, this is what it's telling us, this is what we should be doing more of and what we should be doing less of. Oftentimes we see that, but we never actually change it. We think, oh, that worked well, that's great. But we don't go into the details of why that worked and how we might be able to work that into our workflow to do more of it in the future. So ultimately, a report is something to take action upon. If you have no intention to take action on a report, why are you creating it? What, just for interest? Well, that's taking time away from something that could actually be value-adding. So the purpose of a report is to create action, right? It's to create insights that then lead you to take action in some way that's going to benefit you. So what they're not here to do is provide vanity metrics for you, be looked at but not acted upon. Oftentimes, you get the question, can I just have the latest report? Why? They shouldn't be created just because they're available. Just because you have the data doesn't mean you need to create a report out of it. Just because you have oodles and oodles of different fields and measures in your dashboard doesn't mean you need to report on all of that, or you should be reporting on all of that. Ultimately, they're not here also to create more reports, turning this whole thing into a cottage industry where you set a prerequisite with the report that you're making, and now suddenly everybody wants a report. But everyone wants a report that's slightly different, and now you're creating 10, 15, 20 reports every single month. And for what? For what action is being taken upon those reports? Right, they are here to provide insights and action. So, and what I'm going to be talking about today, we're going to be looking at what your reports really mean and how they give you insights and how trends can help you create strategies for the future and how you can take action and then measure that action going forward so you have something that's truly benchmarkable. So let's have a think about some common objectives that people have out there. Firstly, increase engagement, increase collaboration, increase insight, increase comments, likes and shares. None of those are outcome-leading objectives. Engagement is not intrinsically valuable. Collaboration, very fluffy, very difficult to define what that is and how you would even measure it. Insight? What specifically? Comments, likes and shares, no intrinsic value, right? What is the value to your business? It's really important that you actually set good, very, very specific objectives for what you are doing. If you don't have clear objectives, then how can you be creating the insights that you are wanting to create? So how do you create a good objective? Well, the first thing is you want to identify, what does success look like for you? What's a good win for you? What does success look like? And how will that success affect your business? So what's a great outcome? And what will that change within your business? How does that align with your overall objectives? That's your strategic objectives, your team's objectives. How do all of those align? And what are your targets and conversion factors? What's the number that you're going for? What do you class as a conversion that's successful? A conversion might be someone attending a workshop or someone delivering some training. What are your conversion factors? What are you asking people to do within those, and what do they need to be able to achieve that? Right? All of these questions are ones that you should be spending time identifying before you start your reporting, because then what you can do is you can look at your data and you can say, what of all the data that's available to us allows us to get us close to the answers to these questions. Whereas if you do it the other way around, if you just say, well, what data is available, let's create a report with whatever's available, what you end up doing is creating a report that's massive and takes forever to put together and doesn't actually give you a clear outcome. It gives you a ton of numbers, doesn't give you a clear outcome. So you should be identifying all of these things up front so that you can just focus on creating reports around the numbers that are going to get you to your insights. Now, when we talk about insights, right, insights are something that inform, something that tell you about individuals, something that help you shape your future strategy. But insights aren't in the single figures. They're not in the I got 100 comments. Insights are in the trends, right? They are in the way in which people are using things over time. You can't create an insight from a static point. You need to be looking at your trends over time and saying, how are people using this thing? In what direction is it going? Who's using it over time? Where have we got growth? Where have we got shrinkage? It's the insights are in the trends. One-off reports are literally only that. They're snapshots. They have no comparable factor. You can't make decisions based on a single point of truth. You can't compare them. You can't measure them or benchmark them. You really need to be getting into the trends. If you're not looking at your trends over time, if you're producing your monthly report and you are not comparing that monthly report against previous months, and you are not looking at the trends between your reports, you do not have true insights coming out of your monthly report. Right? What you have is a snapshot in isolation without context. So it's really important, really, really important that you look at the trends and you look at what do these figures represent when we look at the overall activity, the overall usage over time. So adoption reports, which are kind of the most common reports that you would have in a community, tend to tell you the levels of engagement that people have within your community overall, right? And if you look at them over time, you're going to see sort of, a wavy line where there's a lot and then there's a little, then there's a lot and there's a little, go up and down. It will also be affected seasonally. You'll see, less engagement in the summer holiday periods, in the Christmas periods, of course, potentially within the March periods when you have the end of year tax runs and bonus announcements and all of that stuff. People tend to be less engaged in communities during that time. So you'll have a look at these adoption reports and see what their general trend of usage is like. And generally, those adoption reports will show you 1, 2, or 3 different measures in terms of how people are using your platform. Right, the first one will just be how many active people there are in your community. Active being someone has visited your specific group or your community as a whole within that particular time frame, right? They've looked at it in some way. The next one will be their level of engagement. So depending on your platform, you might have a measure which shows you how much they're liking and commenting stuff. So, how much are they kind of getting involved in the conversation? And maybe your platform might also show you how much content they're creating. How many threads are being created, how many conversations are being created, how many documents are being created. That would be what you would refer to as contributing. That'll be the number of people that are actually creating content within your community as well. So you'll have at least the active, and you'll definitely have the participating measure, which is how many are liking and commenting. And you may or may not have a measure of how many people are creating stuff, but you should have at least a count of how much stuff is created within your report somewhere, right? A count of how many threads have been created in this time period, how many conversations have been started, how many documents have created. You should have all of those measures if you dig into your reports. So that's all well and good, but what do these numbers actually mean, right? What does active members mean, right? What can I read out of the number of people visiting my community? Well, the measure of the number of people visiting your community is showing you what you would regard as organic reach. Organic reach being how many people are using your community on a day-to-day basis. How many people could you reach without doing any campaigns or anything else, and how many people are just hanging out in your community? That's what you'd call your organic reach. It's how many people you could get to. The people that are liking and commenting on content, you can refer to them as people that are enjoying and getting value out of your community. Right? They're actually proactively engaging with something. They're leaving comments, they're liking, they're moving around, they're actively engaging with the content. They're the people that are getting real value out of it. They're not your lurkers, right? They're not people that are just reading stuff. And that's not to say that people who just read stuff aren't getting value out of it. Of course they are. But the people that are liking and commenting are that much more engaged, right? They're getting so much value out of it, they're being driven to actually engage and take part. And then the last one, when it comes to how many people are creating new content, how you interpret that will depend on what you're targeting and what you understand by that. If you look at, say, how many people are creating new Word documents, PowerPoints, Excel, all of that stuff, if you're looking at that, then you could consider that as the number of people that are collaborating in your community, because they're actually actively putting their work, creating their work in your community. If you're looking at the number of threads that are created, then you could, again, consider those being very, very highly active people. And assuming you can tie those threads to an outcome, you could consider that a collaborative outcome as well, assuming those conversations are useful, right? So, for example, let's say you've got a Q&A community. You've got 100 threads being created every single month. You know all of those threads are related to answering questions, and therefore you've got a really good measurable collaborative outcome there of how many questions are actually being answered within that time period, right? So consider each one of those pieces of data as a different level of insight into the nature of the people that are actually engaging within your community. And then look at your trend lines and say, well, how is that engagement changing over time? Right? Do you have, for example, an upward line of the number of people that are active in your community? Right? You've got more and more people visiting your community on a monthly basis each time. Or maybe you don't. Maybe you actually have a decline in that. Or maybe you have some shrinkage. Maybe you have lots of people visiting your community, and that's going up, but the number of people that are actually making comments and getting engaged is actually going down as a proportion. And then, of course, you've got the question, why is that? And how can we do something about that? Right? And again, do you have more or fewer people creating documents in your community? And what's the percentage of those out of your total population? And again, how do you increase that if that's an outcome you're wanting to increase? Then, of course, you can look back at your trend and say, is there a point in the last couple of years along our trend line where we saw an increase in any one of those things? Did we see a spike, an increase in the number of people that visited our community in March 2018? If that's a yes, we'll then say, okay, let's go into March 2018 and find out what was going on in March 2018 that was driving more engagement. Now you can see the activities, the campaigns that were going on, you can see what was working, and then you can take insights from that. And you say, okay, how do we do that again? Or how do we take the learnings from March and recreate those now in order to drive more activity in your community? Right, so it's only when you have a trend line that you really get this comparison, and you can actually go back and choose specific times to measure against. If you don't have that trend line, if you're just looking at the last month's figures in isolation, you can't compare that and say, is this good or bad in the big scheme of things? So you want to have a look at that trend line. You also want to have a look at your trend line in terms of when people are around. Like I mentioned earlier, summertime, less people are going to be around. March time, less people around. Christmas time, less people around. Thanksgiving, less people are around. You'll also have things like the days of the week. Right? What days of the week are they most likely to be around? Now, in my experience, Mondays and Fridays are particularly bad days to be communicating into communities because they tend to be the lowest used days of all the days of the week. Why? Because people are trying to get on with starting their work all up on a Monday, and the last thing they have on their mind is going into a community and engaging in it. Right, so you tend to see a bit of a dip on Mondays and Fridays, and a bit less so of a dip on Wednesdays. Your best days, generally, for publishing into communities are Tuesdays and Thursdays. Generally because they've got over the Monday hump, now they're into the swing of the week, they want to get involved, check out what's going on a Tuesday, and then likewise for a Thursday, it's almost the end of the week. Let's go check out what's going on in the community. Fridays are lower because fewer people are just in the office, and that is just true for any organisation. You know, whether you've got childcare or people away or long weekends or whatever, you just generally have fewer people in an office on a Friday. Right? They just tend to not be online as much. So again, you can look at those, measure those out of your trends and say, what are the best days to actually be publishing into my community? It's very, very helpful, because if you go out with a big comms campaign and you say, well, let's release it on a Friday, you can look at those trend lines and say, actually, if we release it on a Friday, our organic reach for this campaign is reduced by 20%, potentially upwards of 20%. That's really significant. It might not, when you look at it on a chart and it's just a tiny little dip, you think, oh, that's not that significant. But you might be losing 20% of your audience if you publish something on a Friday. Who knows? That's the kind of insight that you want to be seeing, so you can start planning accordingly. So, if you have a really big message you want to get out to everybody, pick a good day for it. Conversely, if you've got a low priority message that you're not too worried about how many people see it, deprioritize it and put it out on a Monday or a Friday. People like to think that Mondays are the busiest days for communities because, people are in the office and they're getting going. They're not. The reason being is because they're into their emails, they're into all of the new tasks they've got for the week. They're not investing the time in community engagement on a Monday. If you have numbers that tell me different, then please get in touch with me, because I would love to see them. These are I'm just quoting the aggregated numbers that I see across organizations when I do the analysis. If you have different numbers, get in touch with me, because I would love to see any different numbers that you have and why it is that you would have those numbers. So remember, this is a workshop. So the next thing that I would do within the workshop is I give them all adoption trend charts with no details of where that is representative of, just the lines and the numbers. And I say, analyze this chart for me blind and tell me what you think was going on within this organization or within this group in this time period, right? So I just give them a chart with the lines on it from real groups, but ones that have sort of different shaped lines and different things going on those lines. And I say, tell me what's going on within this time period. Blind, right? I don't want them to think about what the group was or what they were doing or when that was in the year. I just want them to tell me what they think is going on by reading the lines purely as trend lines that convey information. And this works so well. It really does work well, because it really gets people thinking about what the data is telling them instead of projecting their own opinions onto the data. So if you get people to read trend lines blind, you can get them to pull out insights that they'd never considered before and are actually far more insightful than what they've been looking at and using for this whole time. Even people that have been doing data analysis for a long time and have been looking at the same chart, exactly the same chart for a long time, when you start getting them to read these charts blind, without any of the context, just purely on trend lines, it really changes the way people think and look at data. So I encourage you to try this out with your people. So I usually try and put a few different examples together. One of the examples I usually put in is one where you have a really quick climb up within your activity and then a steady increase downwards over time until it kind of plateaus out, right? So I get them to look at that and go, tell me in this sort of, imagine this is a sort of an N shape here, lowercase n shape, right? So you've got a hump and then it just goes back down again. Tell me what's going on here. And of course the answer is, well, we had a really big amount of engagement initially. We hit a peak point where everyone was engaged, but that's trailed off and we've seen people moving out of our community over that period of time. Why? Well, when you start comparing that against your content reports, it's likely that there was less and less content being posted into that community and it wasn't being seeded with content. That will of course create a decline. But also what you'll get within these trend lines is, a big spike up, which is your initial interest, and then it will start to plateau out when you get your core people that are actually going to stick around, right? So you'll get a big spike up, lots of people will check it out, and then only a small percentage of those people will choose to stick around for the long term, right? So that's the kind of trend line that kind of shape could tell you. You'll also have lines that just look like waves, potentially waves kind of going in an upward direction. They'll have humps and troughs, and then you can look at that and say, let's look at that hump. Right, I can see a hump here in July. What's going on with that? What's causing that increased activity within this particular period? And then compare it against your conversations, the content that's being created within that period. And then you say, okay, look, we can see some really, really strong content being created here. And how can we create insights from that content? I'll give them one which has a sort of a more of a stairs kind of look to it, right? So it's like a step. So it goes up, and then it's flat, and then it goes up, and then it's flat, and then it goes up, and then it's flat. So I'll give them a stairs-looking one. And a stairs-looking one is generally where you have periods and phases of onboarding. So you kind of have a spike of activity, you get those people on board, then they start using the community, then you get your plateau, and then it kind of stays there until you get your next spike of activity where you bring new people in, onboard new people, and then you hit a new plateau level, right? So it just kind of goes up in that stairs point. And again, this will all be done in terms of I'll get each table to actually call out their chart, right? So I'll give them 10-15 minutes to look at their chart, chat amongst themselves on the table, and then I'll say, right, table number 3, please tell us which chart you got, and I'll show it on the screen, on the projector. Which chart did you get? And I'll pull it up. Okay, tell us about what you think's been happening in this community over that time. You'll be amazed at how insightful people get. You'll be amazed at the kind of things that they say and how insightful and important the things are when they're not having their judgment clouded by other things. And of course, I'll pull out a few other ones. Other types of charts you might want to pull out will be ones where you just have just a general decline over time. You might have ones that are just really sporadic. Ones that are just like, really high level of activity and then boom, straight down to the bottom. High, straight down to the bottom again. Those kind of ones really start telling you, hey, you're doing some really good campaigns and you're generating a lot of interest, but you're abandoning your people as soon as the campaign stops. So what you're seeing in your trend is loads of activity, and then as soon as the campaign finishes, you're not around, you just walk away, you're not around anymore, you're not creating any more content, and suddenly you just abandon them and you lose your people again. Happens all the time, right? People think on a campaign level instead of a continued adoption level. So give them lots of things to try, and then let's see how they can do them. And then what you can do is start posing them some questions. Say, okay, judging on what you know, what you've looked at now, let's go back to look at what you're trying to achieve. So, for example, what do you do if you're looking to increase your reach within your community? Well, if you're looking to increase the reach in your community, then what you can do is look at some reports that tell you about the people that are currently following the community or those groups. You can look at leaderboards to show you who's particularly active in those groups, and you can show and look at the daily activity within those groups and start targeting all of those people. So you could target existing followers to share your community out, right? You could look for associated groups and bring other people in from associated groups. Or you could look at who's not following the group and target those people directly. So how are you going to do that? You could use announcements. You could leverage your contributors in some way. You can improve your distribution or add another distribution channel, increase the distribution frequency, all of those different things. Right, so you get this sense that once you can see the trend and you can see when things have worked and you can gain the insights from when it's worked and you get a sense of when people are around and what the trends are, you can really start pulling out the solutions. The solutions to these things really aren't difficult. Your data is telling you the solution. It's screaming the solution out to you. You just need to be able to look at it in the right way. So let's say you want to increase engagement in your community. You might look at your leaderboards. You might look at the metrics behind the blog posts, the stories that you're writing, and what's resonating. what headlines are landing, for example. And then you can start looking at what they're interested in, what they're reading, and you could start, say, featuring popular people. Right, if you've got specific contributors that are writing really good stuff that people are interested in, you could feature those people. You can encourage more contribution from people. You can improve your content, improve your headlines. It's pretty straightforward. If you're looking to increase collaboration, you could look at your leaderboards again in terms of your content leaderboards, and you could look at your content reports and see what type of content's working out. And you could look at the number of revisions that you're getting or the number of versions that you're getting for the content that's being created. And you could look at the people that are creating the most versions, because they're your high collaborators. The people that are iterating the most are your high collaborators, and then you target those people. Or perhaps you could train up more people. Perhaps you could embed some more processes into your community. Lots of different things to consider. Well, how about if you're looking to do some culture change? Well, culture change, you're going to want to look at your reports that span across the whole of your organization, clearly. And you're going to want to look to see how people are interacting with each other. What do those interactions look like? So you might look at specific groups and interactions between groups, or perhaps you have reports that actually tell you how they actually interact with each other already. And then you want to look at the type of engagement within those groups and target groups that are going to support your objectives overall. So look for the ones that are aligned to what you're doing. Look for the ones that have got the right levels of engagement and they're exemplifying the right things. Target those. And then surface those groups to help more people have visibility of them and drive more behavioral change. Promote their content, profile their contributors. You know it. How about getting feedback? Well, you could look at your content reports again, see what's being commented on, highlight the big issues, collect comments, ask questions, challenge others. If you're looking to improve processes, you could look at your content leaderboard again, and you could maybe look at your questions. If you can see how many questions are being asked, you can look at your questions or maybe your tickets. If you've got a support system, look at your tickets and create use cases around the insights from those. And then look at the related content and say, well, can we pull in other groups and other knowledge and other content that's going to support the outcomes we want to create? If you've got a Q&A group and there's another group somewhere else full of subject matter experts all on your specific group and what you handle, invite those subject matter experts into that group. Get them involved. So there's loads to be looking at, right? And the insights are there. So when you're looking at your community-wide reports, you want to be, of course, remembering your objectives. And remember that all businesses are different, especially when benchmarking. If you are taking benchmarks and you're saying, oh, we need to be at such and such a percentage, consider the industry, consider the background, consider where they are in their journey. Don't feel obligated to hit benchmarks, right? It is about outcomes. Benchmarks tend to be very count-orientated. They don't measure outcomes very often. Really, you want your outcomes. You want the activity that is happening to be high value-adding activity. What you don't need is just to have as much adoption as possible. Right? If you've got tons and tons of adoption, but nothing happening for your business, what you've got is a whole bunch of people spending time on your community and not helping your business. Right? And that might sound a little bit harsh, but that's the truth. If you can't measure the value of your community, you're going to struggle proving it, and your community will be at risk years from now when you need to go back in and have that budget conversation and say, do we keep our community around? And you can't answer that question. I've seen so many communities die because they can't substantiate their value, and therefore they can't secure ongoing investment, or they can't get a big enough team to support the resource. And then you get community managers saying, oh, why don't people believe me? Why aren't people investing? Why don't they see the community, etc., etc.? And then I say to them, okay, prove the value of the community to me, and they can't do it. And if you can't do it, how can you really challenge the person that says, we're not going to invest in your community anymore? If you can't prove the value to that person, why would that person continue to put the dollars down to invest in it, right? You have to really be focusing on your outcomes overall. So the way you really get the insights, though, is by combining reports, right? It's taking your adoption reports from your community, combining them with your HR reports, right? Finding all the people that are doing stuff and then going out and finding their background, their business area, their age, their level, their appetite, their feedback from survey results, all of this stuff, right? It's when you start combining that data together that it really gets really powerful. Then you can start saying, what are our people like? What are their behaviors? What's their propensity to get engaged? Where are pockets of more and less engaged people? Are managers less engaged than leaders? Are lower levels less engaged than the higher levels? Are our millennials doing more or less? What are our millennials doing? What are our 60-year-olds doing? All of this stuff. That is the kind of stuff you get to when you start combining the reports. When you start putting demographic data with your adoption data, with your behavioral and your feedback data, i.e. when you start using your community reports, combined with your HR reports, combined with your surveys, when you put them all together, then the insights that you can start getting are pretty astounding. And that's when you really start moving the needle. That's when you really start creating incredible outcomes and insights within your community. So always look for that insightful reporting effort. So fewer reports, of course. Fewer reports, more insights. Cut your reports out. If you can't cut your reports out, aggregate them more so they take less effort, right? Or I've seen many teams just experiment with just not sending people reports anymore. And every single time, the feedback has been that no one notices. You might have a massive report work to do every single month. Just try not sending the reports out to a bunch of people 1 month. Just try. See how many of them come back and even notice. You'd be surprised, because people like reports once. What they don't like is reports every single month on an ongoing basis that don't provide them any insights, because they can't action them. So you have the request and you're still creating that effort. They don't care. They're not reading the things. Just try not sending the report out. Seriously. I guarantee you it's going to get you time back. If you've done that before, get in touch with me. Dan at imdanthomas.com. Get in touch with me. Tell me all about your joys of doing fewer reports. And then lastly, when you present your reports, be presenting them to tell a story. Be presenting them in a way that's going to really showcase the insights. Break your reports down into different themes. You might have themes around reach, participation, behaviors, simplification, customer outcomes, right? Break your data down into your key strategic objectives and pull out the insights from that data, right? You might have an insight saying most of our groups are private, which means that people don't want to collaborate, right? Our behavior is not to share. That happens pretty much everywhere. The culture, the starting culture, when you do this stuff, is not to share, to make private stuff. Maybe you've got loads of questions being answered. What's the insight behind that? Well, all those questions being answered are faster and better outcomes for our customers. They're more self-servicing, right? They're more support from our people. They're more ownership. They're more collaboration. Think of all these themes behind the numbers and what those numbers are telling you overall. If you've got groups interacting with each other, talk about the partnership. Talk about what that represents culturally. Talk about the way that they collaborate together. Talk about the voice of the customer or the voice of the colleague within your organization. Talk about the power of feedback and pull out examples and ideas. Create the narrative. Don't just create a report with tons and tons of counting numbers all over the place. Right? It's not helpful for people. It doesn't give that context, and it doesn't give people something actionable to take away. Really, really think about how you present your information and keep it really strategic, high level, so that people can see the insights and they can do something with the insights. And ideally, when you go to create that report, create another page, following page, saying these are all the actions that you can take in order to be able to follow up on these insights. If you just create the insights on their own, if people don't know what the next action is to do something with it, how would they know? So, for example, if you've been doing some A/B testing in headlines and you're saying these type of headlines are stronger than these type of headlines, then provide them a link to a guide that they can learn more about headlines, right? Don't just say, this is better than that, because that's not educating people to actually do something with the insights, right? Provide that follow-up where you're really showing them how to make that change. how to improve that. Now, if you go through that structure, everything that I've talked about just now, what you get out of these workshops is people that come out of workshops and they have their head totally changed around. They look at their data differently. They reduce the number of reports that they create. They create significantly more insights. They make better and more informed decisions. And ultimately, that leads to better outcomes because they're making data-informed decisions instead of counting a bunch of data and having it, but never using it. Or counting a bunch of data and having it, but it being a snapshot that you can't really do anything with. So try that out. If you are into reporting, or you want other people to be into reporting, or you're trying to emphasize the importance of data-led decision-making, then try that workshop out. It's really, really worked for me. It's been really, really successful. A lot of people have enjoyed it. Give that workshop a go and let me know how that workshop works for you. And again, get in touch. Dan@I'mDanThomas.com with your feedback. Really want to hear how that works out for you. Now, before I sign off for today, hopefully that was helpful. Make sure you subscribe if you haven't. But before I sign off for today, if you haven't joined our Untapped network, now's the time to be joining the Untapped network, right? It is going premium imminently. I know I've been talking about this as well, and it literally is. It's going premium imminently. And we have a network called Untapped that is here to support you with creating the passion that you have inside you. It's helping you realize your potential, make an impact, and live your passion. Now, we all have something that we really want to do. We all have something that's important to us. We all have key drivers that we want. Oftentimes we get stuck in our jobs and we don't do the things that we're passionate about. Or maybe we do things that just aren't really to our strengths. So we feel like we're always trying to tread uphill, that we're not moving, we feel stuck. We feel like people don't understand us. We feel like we want to be doing something else, and we yearn for something else, but we don't do it. Or we can't work out what it is. Right? Untap is a network to help you with that. We have daily motivation coming in from me. We have weekly training on different things. We have conversations going on all the time. And we have a really, really good starting community in there that are asking some really, really good questions, right? We also have coaching as well. You can get coaching from me. You can get Q&As. You can even go on the Instant Messenger group and actually talk to us directly. So we've got professional coaches in there, people that can help you break out and create something amazing. That might be getting promoted, moving through your job, changing company, starting your own company, who knows? But we're here to help you succeed. And it's completely free. So join the Untapped group. Go to Facebook, type in Untapped. You'll see the group come up over there, Untapped. Realize your potential. Come over, join the group. Do it fast. It's not going to be free for long. Join us, come in and say hello. I really, really appreciate you being on the podcast for so long. This is my way of giving back. So make sure you come in and do it before it is too late. Go to Facebook, type in Untapped. I hope that was helpful, everybody. Let me know what you thought of the show by getting in touch with me, Dan@I'mDanThomas.com. Awesome to be here. Have a great weekend, everybody. And I'll see you all again on the podcast very soon. Bye-bye.